In the last couple of lectures, we saw about the impact, the threat, and the vulnerability. And we also saw a formula that has the outcome of a risk. So now what exactly is risk? What is information security risk? Information security risk is associated with the potential that threats will exploit the vulnerabilities of an information asset or a group of information assets and thereby can cause harm to an organization. Now, risk is often expressed in terms of the combination of consequences of an event and the likelihood of their occurrence. So, another important formula here you need to remember is the formula that I wanted to actually tell you about is that likelihood, that is this term, multiplied by the consequence, that is likelihood multiplied by the consequence, gives what we are looking right now is risk. So just remember this term LCR. L into C is equal to R. So likelihood, that is occurrence of an event, how much it can often occur, how often the event can cause damage, into the consequence of that event, which means the impact of that event is equal to the risk an organization will face. Now, uncertainty of information security objectives is very important. So here is in front of you in a risk severity matrix. This is the likelihood of the event and this is the consequence. So if the event is very rare and if the consequences is not it is very insignificant, then the risk is very low. For example, a low risk example can be the vSecure's corporate office would be struck by a meteor. Now that likelihood is extremely rare and the risk of the consequence is low because after that I cannot recover the things. So the risk is also very low. Now, if an event is likely to happen, I mean, if it happens almost daily here and impact is also moderate, then the risk matrix says that the risk is high enough. For example, DDoS attack for a corporate office is very regular. There are very high risks of having DDoS attacks, but firewalls are placed in order to, prevent. So in corporate world, you will always have to deal with the risk severity matrix, and auditors also have to look after this matrices in order to assume and determine the risk for an organization. Now, the overall process of risk identification, risk analysis, and risk evaluation is nothing but risk assessment. Now, what is a residual risk? Now, once you eliminate the entire risk of an organization, there is some risk that remains after the risk treatment process, and you have to accept that risk, and that is the residual risk, which means some information, some risk remains throughout the organization. So the residual risk is the risk remaining after the risk treatment. Now, what is risk analysis? Now, the risk analysis is the process to comprehend the nature of risk and to determine the level of risk. What is risk assessment? Now, risk assessment is the overall procedure of risk identification, risk analysis, and risk evaluation. What is risk acceptance? Now, once, as I said, the residual risk that remains after the risk treatment process needs to be accepted. So even though you cannot completely eliminate a threat or a risk, some risks needs to be accepted. So the decision informed to take a particular risk is risk acceptance. What is risk evaluation? This is important. So risk evaluation is process of comparing the results of risk analysis with the risk criteria to determine whether the risk is magnitude or whether it is tolerable, whether it can be mitigated or not. So this is the complete ISMS information security risk management assessment process, wherein first you have to identify the risk, then you have to evaluate the risk, then you have to treat the risk. Now there are these four options of treating risk treatment process, risk response, which we will be seeing in upcoming sections of risk management. So identify the vulnerabilities, threats, asset, then evaluate those risks, whether they have any impact on the policies or whether they have impact on the management standards. Then treat the risk. Either you can avoid the risk, you can mitigate the risk, you can share the risk with different applications and standards, or you can simply accept the risk. So this is the complete information security risk assessment process. And right now you don't need to remember this. We are going to see each and everything in the next section, where of information security risk management. In that section you'll understand this about the risk management. For this lecture, just make sure that you have learned the definition of information security risk, and make sure that you remember this formula which I had told you. LC, that is likelihood, into the consequence, that is the impact, result into the risk. I will see you in the next lecture.